Hey everybody, it's Mortis here. It is currently 1 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. Sorry. I'm a little sleep deprived and I've had to swap my sleep schedule around a little bit because I've had a couple of appointments this week. Mostly due to the fact that society functions during the day. And unfortunately, my circadian rhythm is a hater and prefers me being awake at night. So here I am. This is going to be a new series that will be uploaded pretty randomly. We might have a month where I do maybe one or two of these, and maybe have 5 or 7 months where I just don't do any of them. It's mostly going to be based on vibes and whether or not I feel like talking in depth about something that I consider very important. These are also meant to be both a better way to establish the type of person I am to anyone who might be curious of myself, or to any random person who stumbles into my content and is trying to get a better vibe of who I am as a content creator behind the curtain. If you haven't assumed already, I'm kind of shooting from the hip here. I'm not really going off of a script, even though I probably should. I do have some notes on the screen to try and keep me mostly on track so I don't derail too much, as I do have a habit of going into a tangent. This is also mostly a audio experience. The visual portion is completely optional, though the game that is playing right now is White Knuckle, a fantastic game that is a first-person platformer made by Dark Machine Games that I am incredibly addicted to, along with Kenshi at the moment. Definitely check it out. It's an absolutely amazing game. I think White Knuckles is actually going to be having a DLC. I think it's either September 27th or September 28th. It's going to be the Abyss DLC. It looks real good. You should check it out. So yeah, with most of the introduction done, why not we get into the main meat of this video, which is Mortis or me or the character I'm playing, Mortis or Mortis of the Ortus. Technically, his full name is Morticidum Ortus, but Mortis himself prefers to go by Mortis Ortus. I figured the first video for this series should be about the creation of Mortis, as it feels kind of appropriate. I mentioned some of this in my debut a little bit, and sometimes I'll mention it offhand. But Mortis was actually a character that I was planning to originally use for a D&D campaign that I spent a very long time making. The campaign was going to essentially be my magnum opus, which that might sound very, very grand, but I just really, really like D&D, and I spent a lot of time working on this. Before I was making this campaign, I was in two long-term campaigns that ran multiple years. Before I ended up hosting two long-term campaigns myself that also went a couple of years, as well as hosting a mini campaign that had to do with a prison, which that one was really fun. I actually really miss doing that. Um, so yeah, I spent a lot of time on this campaign when I was making this, and during its creation, I ended up making Mortis as a character. Part of the reason why I spent so much time making uh, all this in particular was just because I really like creating things for people. Not really that I like D&D. D&D is more sort of the medium that lets me do this, but because of the medium that D&D enables, it's part of the reason why I've come to really enjoy creating things to let people sort of create their own experiences within them. Um, I also took a couple other aspects to sort of influence this campaign, which in turn also influenced who Mortis was as a character, because these are things that I'm also deeply interested in or really like. Some of them were things like Planescape Torment, a very, very old CRPG that takes place within the same world of, or the same sort of, I guess, lore of D&D. Um, it's a very philosophically heavy game with a bit of a dated gameplay, but it's got such amazing writing and characters that it's a huge recommend for me. Uh, I also took aspects from Discworld, which was a world or a setting that was written by Sir Terry Pratchett, who to this day has still written one of my favorite iterations of Death. He has Terry has such an amazing, or I should say, Terry had such an amazing way with writing characters and unique settings, and it's something that has greatly inspired me whenever I start writing this type of stuff. And then lastly, probably the easiest is Doom. Uh, Not really a whole lot to go off of here. I just really like Doom as a setting. I like how brutal it is. I like ripping, I like tearing, and I like doing it until it is done. I also took aspects from some other sources as well. You know, I took things from Spelljammer and Tomb of Annihilation, both pretty iconic settings in D&D. Uh, Tomb of Annihilation itself, pretty brutal, unless you're min-maxing characters. But that was kind of the vibe I was going for this type of campaign, with the main focus kind of also for this campaign, which was to take players through multiple different realms and planets that I fleshed out way too long, because I was trying to make it very immersive and whole experience. Because I normally don't like creating a environment for someone to be in where, you know, they just sort of they do everything and then they essentially are like, oh well, I did everything here, I might as well just leave. I always like to leave something there. I find it makes it a little bit more immersive right there. I don't I never really want to have a player leave with the feeling of, oh, I completed everything here, now I just need to move on. I want them to be like, oh well, I completed most things here, but we don't really have time to stay around, so you know I gotta go. I kind of like that more, in terms of trying to, you know, immerse somebody into a setting. Um, Going back into the main setting itself, though, the overall premise of the story and sort of the main struggle for the group was that they were essentially trying to stop a group of tyrannical gods that were essentially trying to remove free will from all beings. They had usurped and killed the old gods, and had essentially tried to take all the power that was left from the, I guess, apparent vacuum that was left. Even though they weren't, uh, they're not, they weren't really able to fully take over all of the roles, unfortunately, and that kind of would have effects and ramifications that the players themselves would see over time. Something that was also pretty iconic to this world was that the adventuring party all had souls that were uh, the dead gods, as the dead gods, or at least most but not all of the dead gods, had inserted their souls or had connected their souls to the loom, which the loom is a device that was created a very long time ago to allow souls to reincarnate as newly created souls. Souls that are brand new and have yet to experience or do anything are quite rare. Without going on too much of a tangent itself, Mortis himself was meant to be a villain during this adventure. He was going to be a pretty hefty hurdle and kind of the main villain for quite some time, as he's sort of the main lock that stops the group from being able to travel to different realms. Uh, the main reason for this is because he's looking to try and keep the other gods from being able to reach into other planes. Obviously, you know, within the world that I created, if you open a portal, it opens both ways. So it's kind of something that Mortis was just trying to keep shut it out. Part of the reason why, though, he's so against trying to work with this group as well is mostly because of the fact that he himself is a chosen, and he was also in love with another chosen who ended up dying and having their soul unwound, which is basically permanent death, where there's no hope of reincarnation, no hope of some spell bringing the soul back. That person is dead. A chosen in this world is essentially someone who is picked by one of the gods to learn their ways, slowly adapt to the power of that god until they eventually take over for that god. As I wrote that the gods themselves do grow tired over time and they themselves wish to retire. Mortis himself, being a chosen, was under the tutelage of the old god of death, which was also slayed and unable to reincarnate, which essentially made him the pseudo god of death. but the power was never really transferred to him. Uh, so he never really ended up fully going into the position or gaining any real enhanced power beyond just what he ended up learning for himself. I'm not really sure why, but I really enjoyed creating Mortis. In particular, I created a couple characters, and there were a couple characters I really enjoyed writing, but Mortis in particular was somebody that I really enjoyed writing. I think it was mostly just because of the aesthetic that I was attaching to him. A lot of the bone furniture and cursed objects, and his own sort of way of, in a way, being an artificer or someone who creates items, but they're all sort of organic and undead. It's something that I've always really enjoyed in the medium of undead lore within like a high fantasy setting. And Mortis kind of led a lot of that out. I was really excited to act him out in the campaign once the players were able to get to him, but unfortunately, due to a lot of problems with the group at the time that I was in, that I won't really go into too many details about because it's kind of depressing. Uh, it really, it really dampened my feelings about TTRPGs uh, and just making things in general for other people, which was really odd because I did three other campaigns for people and they really enjoyed it, but then I have this experience and it kind of just ruins it completely. It was you could probably imagine like why. Well, not imagine. You're probably asking like why that would probably do it. It was a pretty bad experience overall. Um, very much soured how I felt about creating things for people. Some of the people that were in the group that were going to be playing were people I knew for over a decade at this point, and there were just a lot of things going on, and they were taking it out on the world that I'd made, and it just really put me in a bad like mentality with it overall, and then ended up actually making me get rid of everything. I ended up deleting basically everything about the world at that point. Again, I was not in a great mentality. I had a lot of other things going on as well, um, with family and my own job, whatnot. But one of the things I didn't delete was 1 to 2 settings because I was really happy with how I made them, but also Mortis. Uh, Mostly just because I think it was mostly because I just wanted some sort of memento. Like I was really upset and I wanted to get rid of the whole world, but at the same time, I didn't want to get rid of the memory of creating the world altogether. So then I guess I kept Mortis. There might have been a little bit more to that as well because I think I might have inserted a lot of who I am as a person into Mortis, and I didn't want to delete that portion of it as well. But I think it was mostly just the memento of it all, and so I ended up keeping Mortis. I put him in a little folder along with all my other like D&D stuff that I had left, and essentially decided that I'd use him for later for something else. Fast forward and kind of skipping over the path of becoming a VTuber, which I'll probably save for a different video that I'll make at some point, focusing on that and kind of giving my general thoughts on VTubing also in general. But uh, Mortis himself, once he was getting adapted into a VTuber, had to go through a couple changes. Mortis himself, pretty lore heavy. I would argue probably a lot more lore heavy than your typical VTuber. So I had to curate a lot of different things. I changed his personality a little bit to match the overall vibe I was going for with Mortis, as well as uh, making sure I kept most of the roots intact because it's the roots of Mortis that I really enjoyed as a character, as a design aspect, and also just for the general aesthetic that I was going for with Mortis. Um, I also really enjoy Gothic design and I really like Latin. So those were aspects that I decided to incorporate a little bit better into Mortis. For Gothic design in particular, I'm a big fan of sort of late Gregorian and like early Victorian styles. Not really late Victorian because I think I think late Victorian starts getting a bit too flashy, but that's just me. And Latin. I really like Latin. In particular, classic Latin, not really church Latin in particular, or how it's, I think it's Isser, hold on, hold on. I brought it up just in case, unless I just closed. Did I? Oh, I did close it. It's like esoClassical or esoterical Latin, which is essentially just church Latin. Um, Although, unfortunately, I guess it doesn't really matter either way because I normally struggle a little bit with remembering Latin, which is really funny because I did take classes on classical Latin and I've done a good amount of self study myself. But, just like any other language, you start to really brain dump it when you're not using it. I'm also dyslexic. So I'm very bad at both remembering and pronouncing Latin just because a lot of the structure of the words just doesn't sit well in my head. Uh, Probably another thing also I added was Dave, who kind of existed, I guess, for Mortis at the start. It wasn't really in a very prominent role, I would say, mostly because Dave himself is a little bit more personal, and I'll kind of get into that in like a second. But Dave himself was added to it. My not my right, my left hand man, and my advisor to Mortis, as he's meant to also represent the more cynical and analytical part of Mortis. To Mortis's more whimsy and a lot more chaotically evil nature. Of course, we also have to kind of mention the undead themes and necromancy, which were already there, but I kind of turned them up a little bit more for Mortis to kind of get a good idea of why I might be a little bit more interested in the macabre and whatnot. I actually thought about becoming a mortician when I was younger. It was one of the first jobs I considered. I grew up having a deep love for anatomy, learning about organs, the body, flesh, blood, all that stuff. I've never been really squeamish about any of that. Probably a lot of the stuff I was learning from my father also it probably helped that too. My father's a little crazy though, but a lot of that definitely had a huge impact on me and it kind of influenced me to want to go towards the career of a mortician because I have a deep respect for morticians as a profession. Uh, that kind of went into the trash a little bit as I got older, and eventually I shadowed a mortician. And even though I really liked it, and I kind of because I actually enjoyed the explanations of the work and everything like that, I did have to sign waivers and stuff when I was doing the shadowing. But um, the mortician actually gave me some really good advice because I guess there was something that had happened like a day or two ago, and it was like fresh in his mind, so he brought it up um, about like different situations I would have to work in if I decided to become a mortician, and it made me kind of contemplate uh, what I could kind of bear because I never really had a problem with the idea or job of being a mortician. I actually thought it'd be really cool, but the problem is that I never really considered the aspect of potentially needing to work on kids if that situation ever arised. And it's just that was kind of my weak point. I can't do that with kids, unfortunately. Which even the mortician was kind of when he was explaining this to me, he was uh, also kind of empathetic about it because he had a friend of his that ended up having to do the same thing, and he ended up quitting his job because he had to do that. And I just me kind of seeing that, that's my limit, not wanting to take the chance. I just kind of went off of that. But I still have a deep love for anatomy, and I do try to express that within Mortis every now and then. Obviously, I take creative liberties and have fun with some of the things I draw or some of the things I'm willing to express within Mortis. Though the overall necromancy part isn't from being a mortician, actually, or being interested in becoming a mortician, I should say. That actually came from playing a necromancer in Diablo 2. rel- probably probably pretty fanatically, I would say. Um I still remember when I was like 8 or 9 years old, just nonstop playing Diablo 2 as a necromancer. I really enjoyed that game growing up. It was one of the few games I could get growing up because I grew up a little bit poor. And most of the games I was getting were in bargain bins and uh things like that, like discount everything like that. But Diablo 2 holds a very special place in my heart for how many hours I spent on it. But yeah, I used to play Necromancer nonstop. I think my menu had like 5 or 6 different Necromancers. And I would sometimes like just go because I was normally playing the online uh, element, or at least like the local, because I didn't have internet for a very long time because just simply we couldn't afford it. Um, but I did that for quite a long time. I want to say I played maybe 10 necromancers or 10 run throughs of Diablo 2 as a necromancer before I actually played as like a paladin or a sorcerer, which playing a paladin was pretty cool, but definitely necromancer was the way I wanted to go. But in terms of Dave, to kind of circle back to it, because I'm just going on a bit of a tangent here, um, part of the reason I use the word, or I have a assistant named Dave, is because, well, as a necromancer, when you start out in Diablo 2, you don't actually use necromancy at first. You don't even have the ability to use it or anything like that. You just have a wand, and that wand gives you a skill point for summon skeleton. And kind of growing up and having an interest in the macabre, and having a slightly intimidating, slightly cray but loving father, it was a little hard for me to make friends when I was young. That stopped when I was in middle school, but for a very long time, it was very hard for me to make friends without people kind of getting intimidated by me. So, as I was previously stating, a necromancer summons a skeleton. It's the wand. It's the first skeleton you're always going to summon. Over time, I just eventually started to call that skeleton Dave. I think it was mostly stemming from an interest of wanting to have a personal skeleton that was just always around when I'm starting something new. I guess I think it made like the experience feel a little less lonely. Which as a 8-year-old kid, I could probably get away with that. But I also ended up naming the other summons eventually at some point too. Mostly all the other skeletons. I did stop at some point because I normally would focus on like summoning as many skeletons as possible. So it would be like I would have like maybe 11 or 12, I think. I think it's the max you can do. I think it's a little higher than that actually. But I stopped at around 5. I had Angelica, Josh, Jeff, which anyone who watches my streams or sees my content, I've mentioned Jeff a few times. Eventually, the others will get mentioned as well. I'm kind of figuring out how I want to adapt them into everything. But yeah, that was kind of essentially where Dave came from. Was me just naming him. I think it was mostly just the idea of having a personal skeleton when I was naming it. But then again, now that I think about it, when I started naming this was like 2 months after I fell down like a flight of concrete steps. I had a real bad habit of climbing things growing up. I still do have a habit of climbing things, to be fair. I just don't do it as much because of my feet. But that might have had an impact, a little, slight brain damage to encourage a little whimsy in me. Um, but yeah, that's kind of essentially it. I think I covered most of the basis of it. I don't want to go into too much because then I'll be spoiling some things I have designed for the future. But I think this is probably a good point to stop here. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully, I do another one of these. If I don't, yeah. But I hope you have a wonderful day, whoever is listening to this. And see you next time, hopefully. Bye bye.